Hello, I'm Sarah Russell, former producer of the ADHD Skills Lab. I'm thrilled to introduce my latest project, the Neurodivergent Report, an educational podcast dedicated to empowering neurodivergent individuals with accessible scientific knowledge and amplifying their exuberant stories. In each episode, we'll explore topics like the genetics and heritability of neurodiversity, alongside practical strategies for managing executive dysfunction and emotional dysregulation. Together, we can learn to heal in community. However you are able to engage, thank you for being here. Hello, I'm Sarah Russell, the host of the Neurodivergent Report, and today I'm here with Eliza Barach.
Barach.
Oh,
That's
Eliza
okay.
Barach, who is a cognitive psychologist turned ADHD consultant and coach. So let's chat together a little bit about how you take the science and you take the intuition and you mash them together to work smarter, not harder. Eliza, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today, and I can't wait to, get into all the nitty-gritty good stuff. I'm ADHD neurodivergent myself, and so I think when you get neurodivergent brains together, there's a lot of divergent topics that come up. So, um, it's one of the things that makes our brains, I think, really cool, exciting, and maybe sometimes hard to follow, but you can always follow the loop, I think, if you have ADHD or are neurodivergent.
And that's why conversations that get edited also can be great for neurodivergence, because we can sort of take the pieces and arrange them where they were supposed to go in a narrative sort
Yeah.
of style.
Yeah, yeah. Give the option to skip the scenic route.
Yeah. Ooh, I wish I could tell my brain that. Uh, so my introduction did not tell anyone where you are based. So where are you? Where in the
I'm
world?
in upstate New York, kind of near Saratoga Springs.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, we live kind of more in the countryside, so it's nice and quiet.
So you mentioned that you are an ADHD adult. Um, were you sort of diagnosed in childhood, teenagehood, I think?
Yeah, so I'm one of the lucky, I guess you could say lucky girls that was diagnosed early at 17. Um, it was right around some more challenging times in my life. I was being recruited for Division I gymnastics and also carrying a pretty tough, caseload at school, taking like AP classes and things like that. So, I flew under the radar for a bit of time, I think because I was able to do well in school. And then I hit the ceiling.
Sounds like you did a lot of self-accommodations, like you sought out a lot of stimulation, taking those advanced classes and then also having something for your body, like the gymnastics. Um, it's sort of it sounds like you had supports that were working for you, but then 17, 18, like that's the sort of time frame where we start to see maybe changes in someone's presentation.
Absolutely. And, I really loved gymnastics. It was a passion. So not only was I getting the benefits of physical exercise, both mind and body aspects, as well as cardio, right? Um, Getting like the neurotransmitters, dopamine and norepinephrine, as well as like BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor. So like great for cognition. I was getting all of those great neurochemicals from the sport, but I also was very passionate about it. So I got the physiological benefits, but then also that heart centered side. So, when people with
Yeah.
ADHD have something to hold on to, that means a lot. They're able to, I think, activate better access their executive functions and flourish. And so that's just a really important thing to always keep an eye on for people with ADHD, making sure that passion there's some connection that's really meaningful to them in their lives. It puts you in a better position to actually be able to access your executive functions.
Okay, so now let's just start talking about your career a little bit, because you went and got a super impressive degree, and then you did something totally different with it, and that is so ADHD.
The
Um,
whole process is all ADHD. Even getting my PhD in cognitive psychology, I absolutely love psychology. It's obviously why I got a PhD in it, but the way that that happened is I was rounding out, my last year in college, and I was like, I'm not ready to go into the workforce. I just don't know what I want to do. And I just was like, I really am not going to survive. I had had quite a few internships at law firms because I was going to be a lawyer, which is also very common in ADHD, as I've learned. And I just was like, I can't do it. It's just, I'm not going to be able to live the life that I know that I want to live. And so my older brother actually was like, you're like really good at psychology. Like you have excellent grades. Like, you should like do a PhD. And I was like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So I just, I applied at University at Albany, because I knew many of the professors there. And then, the rest was history. And I always joke that if I had actually known what entails a PhD, I probably would not have done it. But I'm so glad I did, because that's where impulsivity like went right for me.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm sure having a PhD has its perks.
It absolutely does. It was very hard.
I was just gonna say it's sort of like a layer of credibility, I guess, that most people don't really question. Did you feel well supported by the school system? Like, did that structure work for your brain?
Yes and no. So I never had like an IEP or any kind of support like that. I think doing gymnastics really helped me build my own support and structure, because if I wanted to go to the gym and have a good workout, I knew that any residue from school would compromise that. So there was something that I felt like I stood to lose if I didn't like do what I needed to do with school so that I could be present at practice. But the school system itself, no, I thought college was actually a much better fit for me. I really struggled with going to class in high school. I often like would miss like the first few periods, and there was a class that I was taking that I had like perfect grades in, but I was in danger of failing because of absences. And so I had to kind of, work with the school on some of that. And in college, I specifically took classes that didn't require attendance, because I really did struggle in the classroom, in the lecture halls, and did better if I could isolate and just read the book by myself. So college was a better fit for my brain. And then graduate school was actually very challenging because of the different requirements. You had to go to class, and I did learn a lot when I did go, but that was hard. Juggling all of those transitions and wearing many different hats in the academic space.
That's interesting. So it sounds like, yeah, I mean, obviously different types of schooling has different strategies and things, but it sounds like you have a very big strength in identifying like where you're struggling and knowing like that there are alternative methods. Is that just something that you always intuitively knew how to accommodate yourself, or like is that a product of your education? Yes, and
I think it's a yes and for sure. I think I might have had that natural inclination, and definitely gravitated toward things that, I felt like I was good at, and tried to self-select environments that were better fits. Yeah, a lot of my gen eds were reduced so that I could jump right into what I was actually interested in.
that is a great way to get neurodivergent teens to buy into AB classes. Tell them they'll
Yeah.
get to skip ahead in college to like the stuff that they actually want to learn. Yeah. Yes. So tell me more about Neural Revolution. Yeah. Tell me how that sort of came about.
Yeah. So not as impulsive as my PhD, but maybe a slight tinge of impulsivity. But in my last year of my PhD, I really was having like an identity crisis. And I was like, I can't do academia. Like, I am not built for this system. There's just so much in it that was just incongruent with how, my values, how I work, all of that. It was there's very much this constrained aspect. And I also was going to have to do probably a postdoc, so additional training before, like, getting, like, a secure position, and that also wasn't even a guarantee. And so that was putting tension on me and my family, me and my partner, because my partner is, he's my husband now too, is just such an important person in my life. And that was gonna be really challenging. And I honestly, like, as much as I absolutely love research and science, there was just so much other stuff that came with it, a little bit of baggage that the parts that I love didn't outweigh the parts that were challenging. And so it really didn't make sense for me to stay in academia, and really be probably not being, feeling well mentally. And so through my own work with my coach, and therapist, she helped me realize that, coaching would be such a great place for me because I could take everything that I had learned and was continuing to learn about the brain, and be able to use that to immediately help people. One of the challenges for me in academia is that you do all of this research, but by the time it may land in someone's hands, it's so long, and there's no guarantee that it gets to have like a positive impact on someone. And so I really wanted to be able to like use the information, in a way that could help people. Talk about being very kinesthetic, right? Of like wanting to see the application of it, and have people be able to use that information in an empowering way to, move them toward their goals, their visions, or just live a better life. And so, through my own work, we came up with, starting a coaching business. And then I always knew it was going to be ADHD, but you know how ADHDers get, like, we don't want to be boxed in. And so, like,
Yeah.
slowly I came over. I was like, this was an obvious given, but I had to, go through my process to be like, no, I am doing ADHD coaching. I want to work with high performers who, have often felt like, one, that they couldn't have ADHD, or people doubted that they had ADHD because they were so successful. And so really helping that population, because I think that understandably they get missed. And then there's a lot of challenges with like imposter syndrome and working so hard to the point of burnout, and really
Yeah,
like
and then people want to be like,
questioning.
"Well, why didn't you just ask for help?" It's like,
Yeah, the hyper independence is so
yeah.
huge there. And also just like a little bit of shame, right? Of not wanting people to see like the mess behind,
Yeah.
the mess behind the brain. And I know that was something that, I felt a lot in graduate school of like, you know, yes, I was able to be successful, but there was so much chaos that was ensuing behind the scenes. And it wasn't just me that wasn't feeling great. Like, it was hard for my husband too, like, one, seeing me so stressed and anxious, but also us not being able to connect in meaningful ways. And I think, one of the things that we know with ADHD is connection is so, so important. And, having a really having wonderful people, but a wonderful partner in your life can be really beneficial. And, when that was hard though. And so it was it just made sense to leave academia and be in a place where things were a better fit, the environment was a better fit, and I had more control over how things were going to go, and being able to have that meaningful impact. Because I always say, like, what's the point of doing all this science if no one ever gets to use it? Well, one of the things I was saying is like, you know, in academia, like, I was dysregulated a lot. I was very stressed,
Exactly.
and the emotional dysregulation was very, very high. And I think a little bit of the imposter syndrome, and like the being afraid if anyone knew the chaos behind the scenes. And so a little bit of that, like, rejection sensitive dysphoria, and in such heightened states, right? Like, it is really hard to access your executive functions. I mean, arguably, too, emotion regulation can be kind of pulled into, a self regulation lens, which ultimately is, our executive functioning. So that chronic stress and, chronic dysregulation, like, put a huge drain on me, and ultimately is what ultimately was going to be stifling my creativity. We know stress is not good for creativity, and our prefrontal cortex is the first to kind of go offline in high levels of stress.
Amazing. Yes, so I would imagine that you share all of this with your clients. It's probably sort of the whole foundation of your coaching, right?
A big part of it, yeah, is
Yeah.
bringing the science in as much as possible. But what I always say there too is like, and actually a professor shared this with me when I was in graduate school, and it was just such a profound, insight that obviously have carried it with me forever. But he talked about science and theory development as like the least worst thing that we have. And I just really liked that because science is absolutely an excellent, excellent resource that we have and is so, so important, but it does have its own limitations. And it's important to acknowledge that. And so I think, the textbook is what we start with, but our clients are really the living experiment. We can start with the foundational knowledge and see what applies and what doesn't apply. And I think good practitioners, regardless of what field you're in, you meet your clients where you're at. You start with the baseline knowledge that we have, and obviously you continue to learn and grow and make sure you're staying up on the research, but you really have to apply it to the individual. And there's going to be deviations. No two people, no two people with ADHD are the same. I know we talked about this in one of our earlier calls, but with research, if there's an individual who behaves differently than the rest in that study, like drastically different, we actually remove their data from the experiment because it can influence the statistical analysis, which may not give us accurate results. But when we do remove someone, what we would call an outlier, that means that the ability for us to generalize the information that comes from that study is we're not able to necessarily generalize it to that population. So wherever that person kind of lives within the population, the data, the results from that study, we can't necessarily with full confidence say that these results apply to them. And so that's kind of one of the challenges I think that we're facing right now in ADHD research, particularly for women, right, and girls, because a lot of the research has centered in on little boys, and also looking at intersectionalities too, white little boys. And so we are missing certain populations, which means that the results that we have, they may not actually apply to the people that we're seeing or working with. And so those are important things to think about, of like, it just because something doesn't like work 100% with someone, that doesn't mean that like the ADHD is not correct or whatever. It means that they just may need something different. And so we're always kind of keeping that in mind of like, yes, we have science to guide us, but we do need to take an individual approach with every single person we work with.
I love that you said that. Just because the treatment method isn't working doesn't mean that you have the wrong diagnosis or whatever. Yeah, I think that's really important. Sometimes even we try to use like skills that have worked for us in the past, and they're just not hitting the same. And then so we're like, what is wrong with me? Why am I doing, the emotion of it all starts to sort of spiral out of control. Which is interesting. I've been learning a lot lately about how the nervous system is not just your brain. And that sounds really silly to say out loud because, like, duh. But we almost sometimes use them interchangeably, and that's wrong. Does
Yeah,
your
there's essential nervous.
does your coaching sort of talk about all that?
Little bit. I wouldn't say I'm like a specialist like in the more somatic spaces, right? But, we know,
Mm-hmm.
like, there's the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, right? And so central nervous system is brain, brainstem, spine, and, or spinal cord. And then, our peripheral nervous system is kind of like the nerves that run throughout the body, right? And that's a
Yeah, the
very, like, boxed
spaghettis,
explanation there.
the funny bone.
Yeah, yeah. And so our nervous system takes in information in lots of different, inputs, right? And so it's important to consider that. And the brain is kind of like the place where it shoots up to. Um, and then magic happens up there. But in terms of like kind of the integration of what we're talking about, so in perception, we can think of perception basically as the translation of physical information in our environment into something meaningful that the brain can use. So it takes like a physical stimulus, translates it into like a chemical message essentially, or an electrical message, and then the brain can start to make sense of it. So you may take in certain information, and then you may get influenced based on any kind of past experience. So, for example, let's say you have a history where you got bit by a dog. So you see a dog, and instead of like the direct translation being like dog, like you're going to see that as like danger, right? Like that's a dangerous thing. And so your past influences how you perceive that,
Even if you
whereas
don't know
someone
that
else
dog.
who
Yeah,
doesn't have
exactly.
that past experience,
Hmm.
yeah, exactly. Someone else may see that dog and it's like it's just a dog. And so this can help to explain a little bit like why, like you could have the exact same data, but two people are going to see it so differently. Well, yeah. And so actually in my PhD, a lot of my work was interdisciplinary, trying to bridge different literatures.
What? Tell me
So yeah,
more.
so, a lot of the work that I did in my PhD looked at like how the brain understands meaning, attentional processes, decision making, and things like that. And so, one of my favorite areas that I dabbled in was actually looking at decision making and error detection. So, the research that I did was looking at like why is it the case that if someone finds a problem or an error, they're more likely to miss a second problem. So I used proofreading as a way to test this. So like why does finding one typo make it harder to find a second typo? A lot of people with ADHD tend to be excellent divergent thinkers, which is very much involved in creative processes. And so
Yeah.
the benefit of sometimes being distractible, right, is that you don't get lured into like the first example or the first solution, because maybe you don't even see it, right? Or like you see it and then you get distracted because there's something better out there. And so that's something that I didn't get to pursue in my PhD, but it's research that I've always wanted to try to explore.
Wow. Yeah, it really is cool to think about the evolutionary benefits of neurodivergence. Um, I love it. I love it because they're out here trying to do like gene variations to like prevent ADHD from manifesting in a human baby, and I'm just like, ew. Ew. Why are we doing that? Um, anyway, let's move on. Uh, you're awesome. Um, Ooh, do you want to talk about perspective memory and object permanence? Because I
Sure, yeah,
know
we
that
could talk
object
about that.
permanence is a really like pop science-y like thing that we're talking about right now. But it's kind of a little bit misunderstood. And prospective memory is something that I love talking about because it's like remembering to remember. It's like you wake up in the morning before your alarm, but you remember that your alarm is about to go off.
Yeah, that's one example. Or like even just like remembering to call the doctor, right? You know that that's on your list, or it's something you need to do. And so like remember to do that. So yeah, I mean, with the object permanence is like a very real thing. It's something we develop. And there's some contention as to like when exactly this happens, right? Some say it's earlier, some say it's later, but you know, arguably object permanence develops anywhere between like 4 and 7 months. And this is basically the understanding that an object continues to exist in the world, even if we can't actively perceive it. So essentially, the sensory information is no longer present, but we understand that that thing is still a part of the world. So, you know, I can understand why the pop culture community is like people with ADHD don't have object permanence. And it's like, I totally get that leap, but most of us, I think, understand that that thing still exists in the world. And that's the key piece there is that it's the understanding that even if I can't see something, it's still a real thing in the world. And so babies usually like under 4 months, like they don't get that. They think it ceased to exist forever. And that's why they get kind of upset or distraught if you hide a toy from them. Because it's like it's gone forever. Whereas for adults with ADHD, it's not that they don't know that that continues to exist. It's that they can't remember the thing. And so that's where perspective memory actually comes into play, because it's, remembering to remember. So when things are out of sight, out of mind, again, it's not that we don't understand that it exists. It's that we don't have the right cues available to us in the environment that jog our memory to be like, oh, right, I need to do that thing, or I need to use the lettuce that's going bad in the fridge. So it's really about, it's not a lack of object permanence. It's a lack of cues to jog one's memory to do a thing. Yeah. Or to remember a thing. And this goes with friendships too. Like, if, I think one of the reasons college was great for some people with ADHD is that your friends are so close, like the proximity. So it's like they're in your face and it's easy to remember because there's the visual cues, right? But with
Yeah.
friends, like if there's not kind of those active reminders, it's easy for us to totally forget about them. And it's not that we're like they no longer exist. It's that I haven't had the right cues or the reminders to remember to engage with someone.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I don't want to ignore the fact that a lot of neurodivergents right now are just have no energy for extra stuff. And sometimes friends is like extra stuff. Like it's more than it's beyond survival task. And some of us only have time, energy, space for survival tasks. And I just wanted to give a shout out to those people cuz I know you're out there and I love you and I'm sorry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too that that also points to individual differences within the ADHD community, within the neurodivergent community, because we're going to see people
Mhm.
fall along the introversion extroversion spectrum. And so for people who are more extroverted, like not having these social engagements, like that's like a high level need for them. And so making sure that there's more opportunities for that, like they may be prioritizing their memory, their limited resources, right, to make
Whoa.
sure they make space for that. Yeah, yeah. Whereas if you're more
Amazing.
introverted,
So
that
it
might be
is
a
about
lower,
prioritization and personal preference. And that's
yeah, and
okay that we
permission.
have that.
Yeah, yeah, permission to prioritize according to you, not societal standards. I think that's one of the crucial pieces with neurodivergent folks is there's so much pressure to conform, right? And that means that our prioritization
Mhm.
systems are trying to mimic that, and that ultimately sets us up for failure. Speaking particularly to the ADHD brain, like our brains, you know, hierarchy of importance is not driven by truly is not driven by external expectations. It's more of like a simulation driven, intrinsic driven prioritization system. So things that we love, things that are stimulating, things that are interesting. It's much more easy for us to prioritize our attentional resources, our emotional resources, and cognitive resources to those things. And sometimes that's for a better or worse kind of situation. But really
Yeah.
thinking about what are the things that I like, what are the things that I value, what are the things that are important to me, not society, that I want to make sure that I can show up for, and giving yourself permission to prioritize according to you, not someone else.
Not to single anybody out, but I feel like this advice is directly for the mothers, especially for the mothers.
I think we've been primed. I think we've been primed, Sarah, because when we were chatting earlier, we were chatting about
Yeah.
motherhood, and I've had conversations with many people, many moms about all of this. And even in my own, support systems in my own work, I've been told like, you're going to parent differently. You're going to be different as a mom. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's okay. And it's just really thinking about like who you want to be as a mom, how you want to show up for your kid and your family, and doing it, the way that makes the most sense. And like, I know for me, like, there's been some challenges, momming, and some shame and some guilt. And that's, I think, totally normal. It's a very understandable experience. And so, I know when so I have a 7 month old, Nina, when she was first born, like, it was so much excitement, like total adrenaline rush, like totally like a perfect ADHD landscape, at least for me. And then as we, momming became more of the norm, I noticed some challenges with certain things like, sometimes like playing with the toys felt a little boring. And I used to get so upset with myself. And I was like, okay, like, you're gonna have to do things differently. Like connecting with your kid, you probably are gonna have to do appropriately high level stimulation things. So one of the things we do is we do swim classes now, and like we have so much fun. She loves the pool and I love the pool. So really working to connect with your kid, I think, in ways that work with your brain and that are also going to work with, your kid's brain too.
Yes. Yes, that's so true. Like right now, we're doing a lot of speech therapy in my house, my 2.5-year-old, and so I feel like I've just turned into Miss Rachel. Light on. And that's great, but it is exhausting also. So I have to make sure that I don't like over budget my time, energy, executive functioning, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, because one of like I guess my biggest priority in life right now is being a good mom and being there for my kids,
Mhm.
which is why I was almost late to this call this morning because I had to drive back to the school to give my kid the water bottle that he left in the car. And then
I was also
ironically, you were
late
also,
because,
yeah.
yep, yeah, making sure that, my kid had what she needed too. And
Mhm.
I totally agree with you. And I think
Extra
really thinking about
time.
what allows you to be the parent that you want to be.
Oh, maybe that's the answer for me. Extra time is the answer for me. Because for me, I guess I need extra time in order to be patient.
Mhm.
I don't know. That doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense though.
No, I think that makes perfect sense though, because if you let me know if I'm on the mark or not here. I'm not attached to being right at all, but I think if you have more space and more time, that gives you a chance to pause, right? And collect, think, and not feel like the stress of like
Regulate.
you're always running. Yeah, you're always like running behind the ball or whatever. And so if we're in that kind of stress space, a little bit of what we talked earlier, like there's not enough resources to kind of do that like more present focus. And so when I am able to make sure that's prioritized, I show up as, a much better wife, a much better parent, and I think just a much better person. So again, it's kind of like this filtration process of like, what do I value? What's most important to me and what supports me in meeting those values?
That's so nice. That's so true. Uh, I immediately wanted to discount myself because rushing is not an emotion. But like it brings up emotions, I guess. So interesting. Cool. All right. So let's see. I think the last thing we absolutely have to talk about is your Focus Forward program because I I want to know. No, I love that you also want to support people who are supporting neurodivergence, right? But it might have been word salad, but go.
So Focus Forward is a group coaching program for people with ADHD. So that's kind of my program that that's for goal setting and support and accountability. I think goal setting has a lot of triggers around it because people, I think pop culture and there's been this overprescription of like how it needs to be done. Like SMART goals is just one example that, I mean, almost all of my clients, not all of them, have been like, I hate SMART goals. And I'm like kind of in that camp myself too. I think there's a place sometimes they work and but sometimes they don't. But viewing it as like if they don't work that there's something wrong with you. It's like no, this is a system, a user and system incongruity. It's not necessarily that there's anything wrong with the user. It's that it's just the system doesn't match. So we need a different system. And so,
With
you know,
compassionate language.
well, I mean, when has it ever served us to just be like, a dick to ourselves? Never. And anyone
I don't know, but we keep doing it.
I mean, maybe one time it'll work, right? I mean, at some point, being harsh on ourselves did work and probably did save us at some point. And so that kind of sticks with us. The other thing, too, is that negative information is very sexy. It's very stimulating. Our brains latch on to it because arguably there's more evolutionary survival value in attending to something that's negative because there's a threat. So if we allocate resources to the threat, then that's going to save us. We're going to prolong the human race and more babies to come, right? We live forever. Just kidding. But like that's in part, I think why is like we need to attend to it because it's dangerous. But reality is that, it doesn't always work. But it does get a priority for a number of different reasons. Um, but with that being said, I think part of like, therapy or even coaching is like helping people see that you don't have to do it that way. Like there's other ways that it can be done and really showing the brain that you can have success by using a different system. And that's kind of, a big piece of that is like seeing you can do it differently, understanding why it makes sense to do it differently too. Like a lot of us, like, we're like,
Yeah.
how many times have you been told to break something down? It's like, yeah, okay, you break it down.
A
But it's
lot.
really like, yeah, exactly. So it's like if you can explain to someone like why it's compatible with their brain, like that helps cultivate buy-in. So like, I always I know I've gotten annoyed and feel like, oh, I'll break it down, but like when I can remember like okay, if I break it down, actually what's happening at, the level of the brain is that smaller pieces, I can hold that in my head better because I do have a smaller working memory capacity. I can't hold as much in my head as someone else. If I try to stuff a million things in there at once, I'm going to get overwhelmed. I'm going to get dysregulated. And then I'm just going to throw everything out the window and not do anything. And then I'll come back later and be upset that I didn't do anything. So when you can kind of trace why it works with your brain to do a certain thing, that does it can increase the buy-in as to like why this strategy might be useful. But you really have to viscerally feel that for yourself. It's not enough to intellectually get it. You have to feel it in your bones that, oh, this makes perfect sense, and like really feel that. And so that is kind of like that's a big part of like the methodology that I use in my coaching is really thinking about like that visceral, the emotional side of it. We talked about emotional dysregulation a bit ago. And like, yes, it gets a bad rap, but if we can flip it and use it more as a strength of like, we're very passionate, we are emotional people. And when we latch onto something that we believe in, we will make that happen. And so I think that's the flip that's really important is making sure you're connecting with that heart centered. It's not enough to be logic driven. It really needs to be also emotionally driven. And so that is a bit of the approach that I take, like in focus forward in terms of like goal setting, goal attainment is like really thinking about what actually matters to you. Like in 4 weeks, like what would you be disappointed about not getting to attend to or not getting it done? Really thinking about that future self because if you ask me like, oh, what do you want to complete by 4 weeks? I'm like, I have no idea. But if you ask me like, what would I be disappointed about not getting done at 4 weeks? Then I'd be like, oh, yes, I know. And part of that has to do with tapping into our emotions, but also something called loss aversion, which is basically where humans are more motivated by a potential loss than a potential gain. But we have to,
FOMO.
again, be very careful in that. Yeah, a little bit of FOMO, but we have to be really careful in that framing too to make sure that the FOMO is not being driven by like some societal pressure. It's actually being driven by some
Yeah.
mission valued thing, like something that actually matters to you. Like, who cares if yeah, this is me personally. It's like, who cares if you didn't like, this is a real example. You didn't make like the foot imprint for your kid yet. Like, yeah, that would be great. But what I really would be disappointed about is not getting to do the swim lessons. Right. So really thinking about, how does that become a priority? How do I strategize around that? And this obviously applies to many different facets, like maybe your business. And like, I know for me, like one of the things that I'd be disappointed about not getting to or not having time to spend on is, writing my book. That's a huge thing for me, and making sure I do that. And so this framework very much supports that of like, okay, at the end of 4 weeks, if you didn't, if I didn't get to work on the book, I'd be pretty bummed. So then it's like, okay, well, let's work backwards from that. So that's a bit how that program is built. And again, really built with the ADHD brain in mind. And it's a group setting. So you get to kind of feed off of the energy of other members who are also very motivated and excited about, something that they're wanting to make progress on. And it's just such a great think tank as well. And it's pretty structured. Normally, I'm not a huge structure-y person. There's that love and hate, right, with ADHD and structure, but this has some really nice structure where we're doing it together, and it's great because it also captures like your wins and your progress as you move through each week, and it spits them back to you. So like you don't have to actively like sift through your old notes of your wins. As long as you're reporting them throughout, the group, they get captured and you get to see them at the end too, which helps combat that feeling of like, I didn't do anything, which is never the case. You absolutely did. It's just, it's easy for things to fall out of our heads. Like we talked about earlier, a bit of perspective memory, like needing to remember. So this is a great way to externalize objective data of your success. Again, as I mentioned earlier, when you have objective information, we're usually pretty reasonable, I think. And so if you can see that objective data, then it's like you can't do that negotiation as much in your brain of like, well, I didn't really do that. Like you have the cold hard facts, and you're in a positive way forced to confront them.
Yeah, definitely like a done list or an accomplishments journal, or like, I mean, there's a million strategies for that, but I love that you've sort of taken some of the manualness out of that for your group.
I think that's the biggest challenge with like a lot of that stuff. Right? Yes, it's so great to capture it, but like making sure you have the time to go back to it. And like if there's a way
Uh,
to like automatically have it surface, that's I think the big piece. And that's one of the pieces I love about Focus Forward is that you do kind of, you do fill out some worksheets before we hop on the call, like asking about your wins and stuff. And then those wins get presented to you at another point in time in like, like a PDF essentially. So it's also another like worksheet, but it's a PDF. And then it lists like all the wins that you had and, strategies that you reported that helped you. And so it's a nice centrally located document that you get to leave with. Um, and, I encourage participants to print it out, make sure they're saving it, so it's readily accessible. So it helps kind of build that toolbox for them and also show that they are absolutely capable. They're more than capable and they can get shit done.
yeah, it sounds like you really know your clientele. I'm sorry. I love it when people like actually develop programs to support the people that they're selling to. I don't know. I know that seems like,
Yeah.
again, like a basic, but
No, but I agree with you. I think there's a lot of shit out there. And like, I think I think with ADHD, we sometimes fall to impulsivity, and so then we, like, might buy a course or buy a thing, and it's, like, promising, it's pulling on the emotional dysregulation, and it's like, "This is the thing," and, like, I can't stand silver bullets, when people market silver bullets because it's there's not a silver bullet. There's lots of layers of strategies, and as you mentioned earlier, like, one of the things I think that's frustrating with ADHD is like strategies have expiration dates. They just do. And so knowing that about ourselves is important because it doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. It's just that a strategy has a certain shelf life. And when its time is up, then we want to just rotate to another one. And that's what's great about like having that toolbox or like, with Focus Forward, having that list of strategies because you can more readily access, you know, things that have worked for you in the past. And in terms of strategies and their expiration dates, it's, they expire, but that doesn't mean that we might not find that strategy beneficial in the future. It's kind of like, okay, the tomatoes have rotted, but we can buy some new ones at another point in time and then use the tomatoes for something else.
Eliza, thank you so much for being here. Um, this has been an amazing conversation, and I just want to make sure that everybody knows how to find you. Where can they learn more about your work?
Yeah, so I actually do a newsletter every month. It's called Chaos Managed, and it
So
basically
cute.
covers it, thank you. Um, I got the idea a bit from Harry Potter, Mischief Managed, at least the name. I actually never read the Harry Potter books. I just watched the movies, so please don't like put me on the stake. Every month I release this newsletter and it covers an ADHD topic. It provides brain-based insights. It pulls from the research and the science to help us better understand this ADHD phenomena, and then some tips and strategies for individuals with ADHD. And so there's a brain-based tip section for people who have ADHD, and then also a brain-based tip section for practitioners who are supporting individuals with ADHD. So I do work both with individuals with ADHD doing coaching, and then I also work with practitioners and help them better support their ADHD clientele. So I've worked with mental health professionals, and I also run a group for coaches. It's called the ADHD Practitioners Community, where we come together and we discuss, certain ADHD topics, the research around it, and strategize around that topic to better support our clients. And then also, members are able to bring like a challenging case and receive support from the group to better serve, better help their client. And so that's essentially kind of why that newsletter covers both of those bases of giving tips to individuals with ADHD and also practitioners who are working with ADHDers.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes sense to just take what you know and package it for as many different people that can use it as possible. But we can't always speak to everyone with the same words, like that's just not how it works. So
Yeah.
I love your little chaos flurry of support that you have going on. It's amazing.
And I forgot to say, like, you can subscribe to the newsletter at my website, which is,
Mhm.
www.neural-revolution.com. I always like struggle saying that because I'm like, who's like, just like an auditory processing thing. But that is my website. That's where you can learn a bit more about me and, the programs I offer, like I said, focus board. And I also do one-on-one coaching, and also that ADHD practitioners group, and the newsletter. I love the newsletter. I just want accurate information going out to people so that they can better work with their brains. Also, I think knowledge is power, and accurate information is just so crucial.
Yes. Yes, especially these days. Um, it's like access to knowledge has never been more available, and yet.
Yeah. Well, like I think it was a couple years ago and this year too, just some new studies coming out talking about like the misinformation on social media, specifically like TikTok around ADHD. And so, like, I think in the most recent study, they said about half of the videos presented misinformation. So they weren't necessarily putting out accurate information. The one benefit is that it raises awareness and it does help, I think, normalize, and maybe has the potential to reduce stigma. So I think, can we have both though? Can we have accurate information and reduce the stigma?
Yeah, I would love that too. I think we're both working towards that mission a little bit with our separate projects. Um, yeah, amazing. Yeah, definitely. Ugh, shared values. Um, Amazing. And I'll obviously put all the links and plugs in the show notes as well so that everybody can engage with Eliza. My last question is going to be a little card pull because I like novelty. So these are just a free resource from a company called We're Not Really Strangers. Describe a time when something unexpectedly worked out for you.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay, I should have to think for a sec.
Of course.
Something Something unexpected that happened that actually worked out for me. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, I did Division One gymnastics for a year. I was at the University of Washington, and I had a full scholarship. And reality is I was actually quite unhappy there. Whatever you've heard about the NCAA in terms of sports, there's a bit of truth, especially with the gymnastics side of things. It can be very toxic. It's a tough environment, and so in my freshman year, I was having hip problems again, which I had had as a kid. I had already had surgery to kind of fix the issue. And so I ended up seeing my doctor again at Boston Children's. And they basically did an assessment. They're like, if you don't get this surgery, which is the surgery I had postponed as a younger person, they're like, if you don't get this surgery, you're going to need a hip replacement probably at 30. And so this surgery was actually a career-ending surgery. And so basically had to make the choice to stop doing gymnastics or continue and risk like ruining my hip. And this also meant like I basically was probably going to lose my scholarship. So I made the decision to exit and I left. I did one more quarter at UW and I left and I went back home and I went to UAlbany to figure out what I was going to do. I met my best friends there who I'm still very close with. I grew up, near Albany, and staying there also led me to my husband too, because he was coming back from the Marines a few years later. So as as upsetting as it was to lose the scholarship and need this career-ending surgery, it ended up paving the way for the rest of my life in such a positive way. Coming back home, going to UAlbany, it ended up being one of a very pivotal and important thing to happen to me. It was very devastating, but it did pave the
Yeah.
way for a beautiful life and some incredible outcomes. And there was a lot of bumps along the way, but I always say to my husband, like, the only way I would do it differently is if I got the exact same outcomes that I'm having right now. So it's like, why bother?
Yeah, that's definitely one that would seem unexpected. Sometimes, like, I know everybody wants you to find the silver lining in things, and especially it's easy to do that in hindsight. Like, having a career ending, like, physical issue that's a tough one. Like, how do you find something positive out that? But it sounds like it really just freed you up to go in a
Yeah.
different
And of,
direction.
and of course, I didn't feel like that when it first happened. I
Of
was
course
pretty
not.
upset and it was really hard to hear. And like, they were saying you may never run again and you may not be able to like lift weights. And so that was hard to hear, but I did run again. I ended up running lots of 5Ks. Yeah, I'm glad that you're doing this, but like you need to listen to your body simultaneously. And so, now I swim when I can. I mean, it's tough with
Mm.
the little one. But yeah, I think it was very, but I do think like like the phoenix, right? Like absolutely burst into flames drastically, but I do feel like I rose from the ashes. And a lot of that too is because there were things that I could control. That I loved school, I loved learning, I loved psychology. So like I always had that, even if everything else was up in flames, like I always had the academics, because I loved what I was doing. And so that was a big piece of it, I think, too, that helped me be resilient and also leaning into like what I needed, like this, stopping gymnastics. It had to happen. And it's not like I didn't do anything wrong. Like it was just the hand that I was dealt. And so I was like, I'm going to make this hand work, even if it feels really hard and scary at first.
Yeah. And you were a young adult when this all unfolded, so that's pretty mature, actually, to have the reasoning capacity for that at that age as well.
Well, I don't think I really didn't have a choice. I think that's what it
When
comes
push
down
comes
to.
to
It
shove,
was,
yep.
yeah, it was like, you can either let this define you or you can do something about it. And of course, there was space to grieve and be upset. That's I think a normal response and an important response to have. That grieving process of who I was, that was hard. But I think you give yourself that space and then it's like, okay, what can I do about it? And I do think I think that is a bit of my personality, like how I am built. Like I am very much like obsessed with solutions and problem solving. And so I think having the space to be upset and then shifting over to this like kind of opportunity mode, is a bit like how it works for me.
So wonderful. That's so good. Well, I look forward to learning more from you about sort of slowing down and making these more rational thought processes work for me. uh, yeah,
Environment.
this has been
Environment is
awesome.
everything, Sarah.
So true. And
Yeah, thank you.
resources.
It was yep, exactly, yeah. I think of environment, we have the external environment and then our internal environment, and really thinking about ways that we can influence both of those, because it's not just the external scaffolding, it's also the internal things like emotions, dopamine, norepinephrine levels, all of that stuff, and what do we have control of in terms of the internal environment, and making sure that we're being approaching it synergistically, internal and external.
That is a really helpful reminder. Thank you.
Yeah. Beginning and endings, I personally always struggle with. They're hard.
Thank you.
This was
Be
so awesome,
healthy.
Sarah. I'm so excited. Yes, you
Thank
too,
you so
and thank
much.
you so much for this opportunity. And
Thank you for being here. If you want to connect with the Neurodivergent Report, you can find us at ND Report Pod on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube. If you're looking to support the show, the best thing you can do is to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Please. You can check out ndreportpod.com for more information, or if you want to be a guest contributor. Until next time, be well, do good.